All right, folks. Today we're here with Michael Wardlow, the Equality Commission's Chief Commissioner. Michael, thanks very much for agreeing to have a chat with us.
Not a problem, Paul.
And today we're going to talk about Men's Health Week and men's health issues. Men's Health Week is from June the 10th till the 16th of June, which is Father's Day. Michael, I just have a few questions for you. Feel free to answer away. And the first question we have is, what do you think are the main issues that men face today?
It's interesting, I turned 65 last year, and I'm sort of looking back and saying there have been at least probably maybe 3 or 4 major shifts in my lifetime. So when I was growing up, it was, my mum never worked the day after she married my dad.
Yes.
And in fact, there was a marriage bar that existed until the 60s, where if you were a woman and you were married within the civil service, you left the service because men had the jobs. So I came from a world where there was a stereotypical role for men.
Mm-hmm.
We then sort of moved into a period, I guess, where we were bringing people in from other communities. We had sort of then the 35 years plus of what we euphemistically call the Troubles.
Mm-hmm.
And I think within that period, most of the violence was carried out by men, but a lot of the people who were harmed were women and children. So there was a whole issue in there, I think, about what the role of men were. And we're now coming to a time where, very recently, I was involved in a discussion where I talked about, and I made reference simply to what was being referred to as toxic masculinity.
Mm-hmm.
And I was trolled on my Twitter account. I was stopped in the street. I was told I bought into a feminist theology, that I had been sucked in, that men should be men and all of that. So I guess what that said to me was there is a real issue about what it means to be a man today. And I think it's a very good question, and I don't think there's a simple answer.
Yeah.
Because the role that I talked about, that I grew up with, that my dad could have spoken for me, I could have got in.
Yes.
And partly that was because of my Protestant background.
Mm-hmm.
I recognise that. But those things have now changed.
Yes.
And men who thought they were going to be in a job for life are now more likely to be in a contract, which is more likely to be part-time for a limited period of time. So the old idea of what a man did, and going to school, and men did the hard stuff, or they went out and worked with their hands, that's the stuff I was brought up with. Mm-hmm. The world is a very different world now.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of young men that I talk to, including within my friendship circle, are really struggling to find out what it is, what it means to be a man today. They struggle also with a bit around language, about, can I say this anymore? Am I allowed to say that anymore?
Yeah.
Now, I'm not saying women don't have the same issues, but you've asked me specifically about men.
Mm-hmm.
So I do think there needs to be a regroup and a rediscussion around what significantly is there that men can say affect them. Now, there are some specific things. I do think when you look at the figures, if you look at education, the people who leave schools with the least number of qualifications are young men, and they come from working class communities. Statistically, in terms of percentage, more Protestants leave. Numerically, more Catholics leave. It's men.
Yeah.
If you look at a subject close to my heart, which is mental health, almost 30% of men say they've never actually opened up and talked to anybody about mental health problems, and only about 19% of women. If you look at the workplace, less than 10% of men say they've ever talked to anybody in the workplace about their mental health. And yet the business and the community say about a third of workers in the workforce have mental health problems, the majority of which are men. And I do think that's one of the things that face men. For so long you were told, big boys don't cry. Men, man up, all the stuff that still does the rounds.
Yeah.
So young men particularly, if they grow up in that behaviour, they then go, well, what is it that I can do as a man? And one of the things I find they don't do is talk about how they feel. And I think it isn't that we need a week to talk about what we feel, but a week allows us to focus. Yes. It's okay to say you've got problems with your mental health. If you've had a broken leg, you go to the doctor. So why is it if your head's broken, if I could use those terms, we don't think it's appropriate? So I'm glad we can talk about it.
Yes.
I'm glad it's an opportunity to say there are things that seem to affect men more than women, and I think mental health is one of them. And where women are more likely to talk about it or share about it, men are less likely to talk about it or go to their doctor. That needs to change, because it's men, majority, who end up going beyond and taking suicidal thoughts, and then unfortunately it ends up in people taking their own lives.
What about role models or mentors? Did you have a mentor or a role model in your life, that maybe a male role model that you could look up to?
Well, I was fortunate to grow up in a family where my mum and dad stayed together for their whole married life. My dad stayed about 12 years now. He was a man who had very strong values.
Yes.
He was a man who, although he would smoke and I've never smoked, he encouraged me not to smoke. So in my family circle, he was a positive role model, and I know that's not the case for everybody.
Yeah.
He was the one who encouraged me to follow my dreams. He was the one who said, nobody in our family has gone to university, you should. Now, I chose not to at the age of 18, but he said, look, it didn't really matter, you should go, fly, I think. And I think to have that encouragement from the role model, my father in that case, when I went into work, there were a number of males who for me epitomised, I suppose, what I wanted to be. But I didn't have the system of buddying that we have now. I didn't have a mentor as such, but there were certainly individuals in my work life who I felt, actually, you have the values that I want to have. You're a man, and yet you're not afraid to show your emotions, show you all those things that I were told as a man to sublimate, not talk about. You're a man who actually is at ease with himself. You're a man that doesn't have to raise their voice to be heard. And I suppose 2 or 3 managers that I can think of in my early life. And then because I was brought up in a faith community, there were a few people within my church context who I just felt, you actually exemplify the characteristics. Now, there were a lot of women as well, of course.
Yes.
But you've asked me specifically about men. And I think if there was a common characteristic in it, it was these were people who exuded generosity. And generosity was able to, when you ran into what might be an intractable problem, just by someone having a bit of grace and generosity, those things were unlocked. And that was something I learned very early on, because the tradition that I'd been brought up to is you shout. I'm sure others were the same, and you resolve things through not by discussion but by argument, and it's the one who makes the best points wins. Whereas what these people were saying to me is there's other ways around here.
Yes.
And I think if I was learning anything from them, it was the fact that we need to engage, we need to listen to the other person, but more importantly, acts of generosity, particularly when they're random or unexpected, can unlock a lot of stuff. And I think that's something both sexes could actually learn from.
Generosity, integrity.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, they for me would go hand in hand.
Yes.
And also, I can remember very early on, one of the managers when I was working in the private sector said to me, and he talked about coming from a working class background, and he talked about how he had made it as head of his profession, and he headed up one of the largest insurance companies in Northern Ireland at that time. But he said, I've never forgotten my roots. And he says, I don't have people call me Mr. They're called by my first name.
Yeah.
I still know I run the place, but my door's open, and it's open to everybody. And I thought, goodness, that's not what I thought leadership was about. And I think again what he said was, I'm a man of integrity, and how I show that is I have an open door here. Now, I'm not running a charity. I want to make a profit. The bottom line's important, but I can do that by actually bringing people with me. And for me, in the early 70s, that was a real something that I've never forgotten. The encouragement and the empowerment that man brought to his staff, both male and female.
Brilliant. So, my final question is, now I know that you're going away on your holidays during Men's Health Week, so what are your plans to do during Men's Health Week?
I take every year about the first 3 weeks in June, and it's been partly historical because our children are up now and we can take time whenever the schools are still in session. We've gone to the same place for the last sort of 10-15 years. It's a place I know and love in rural France. I can go there, turn off. Sometimes there's Wi-Fi, sometimes there's not.
Yes.
And in one sense, the worries of the world can go past. But I do find after the second or third day, all the stuff that you carry with you, you somehow sort that into things that are important and not. The job that I do here and has done for 7 years, a lot of what I hear are the problems that people have. And a lot of what we try to do here in the Equality Commission is try to help people know there are rights, they can be protected, and we're here to support people, and we're here to work with employers as well. So the Mental Health Charter is a big thing that I'm very proud of, that our organisation and others have helped actually develop, and now the civil service, all the health trusts, the ambulance service have all said, we now sign up to this, and it's okay to talk about your mental health.
Excellent.
So when I go away, I'm sort of thinking back and thinking, it's a changed world. I'm also looking forward, because I have a year left in this post, and it's a good time for me to reflect. But most importantly, it's a time, I guess, just to relax and forget about work and just think about enjoyment. And it's actually all right to enjoy yourself. There's no guilt involved in that.
Yeah. And do you speak any French?
I did 7 years of French.
Yes.
And I continue to do violence to the language when I'm there. But I've just funny come back from a visit to Cameroon. I was doing some work there, and it's French speaking.
Okay.
And I found at the end of the week, I was actually hearing and listening to most of the French. Now, what I put back was probably less than perfect, but I find if you try, if you actually try a wee bit of the language, people reciprocate. And this is about the generosity thing. Actually, I don't mind being stupid.
Yeah.
You know, I've had a lot of experience of it, but it's okay to make a mistake. You know, sometimes men, they don't like to look stupid. And it's getting back to the issue. Actually, for men, I think there isn't a stereotype. But one thing I would say, there was an old Celtic philosophy that says that we should each have a soul friend, and in Irish it's the Anam Cara, soul friend. And there's a saying that says that a man without a soul friend is like a head without a body. And if there's one thing I could leave with you is, to all the men listening, really seek out a soul friend, someone that you can actually talk to and confide with, but more importantly, someone who can hold you accountable and say, you know, that stuff you said you were going to do about letting it go, about the work-life balance, are you really doing it?
Okay, Michael, I think leaving it on that note is brilliant. Thanks very much for taking the time out to have a yarn with us.
Not at all. It's been
absolutely
a delight.
Brilliant. Thank you.
All the best with your stuff. Thank you very much indeed. Is that all right?
Well, super.
It's probably